Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me and see me? Good afternoon. I've already been corrected. Yes, it's afternoon technically, isn't it?
Sounds coming through well, Carly.
Good. Powered here as well. Always a relief to know my my training buddy's on with me, my technical expert. Okay, what time are we on now? We'll give other people who are logging on this morning a few minutes to log on. We'll start dead on at 12 noon. Morning from sunny North Wales. I'm glad you've got sunshine. It's raining here in Crawley. My partner told me to put on a sundress because it was going to be sunny all day in the south, and then it's just rained all the time since I put it on. So I'm not going to be very structured this morning. Not that you've come to expect me to be particularly structured. I've not got slides. I'm going to try and make this session as much about your questions as anything else. What I will do, however, is just at the top of this, I will go through the letter you received last night, and so I can pick up on a few points. So I'll share a copy of that letter on the screen with you, and then we can just have a resume of those key points of the letter, and then we can dive in with the questions. So if, as a reminder, we keep questions in the questions tab and chat in the chat tab, it just makes it easier when myself and Howard are popping in and out of chat and questions, if we know we can store up all the questions in one place and quickly go through those. We'll keep an eye on the chat as well, but mainly keep any burning questions you've got in that questions box. Is that okay with you, Howard?
Yep, that's fine. I can monitor that.
Okay, cool. Well, we'll both do that monitor's job today, because I know we're going to have lots of questions. I have got some questions that people have been sending in via our support email. We've seen on Facebook and on other social media overnight. I know you've had a lot of questions this morning on the support email, Howard, as well. So we'll chuck a few in that we're getting from other places as well as prompt a few questions and ask you guys a few things as well. So just waiting for a few more people to join us. I know we've got a lot of people on this morning. Just going to do a test that I can navigate away. So bear with me here. This might be a bit clunky. I'm going to navigate away for a moment. You won't lose me. I'm just going to see if I can share the letter from DVSA on the screen so we can go through it a bit more detail. No, that's not going to work. Okay. Maybe share material. No, not that one.
Carly, while you're doing that, I've got a couple of questions here already, which I can go through.
Yeah, why don't you do that, and I'll.
Okay. Chris's question is: if I follow all the rules on sanitising the car as per your webinar, what stops me starting lessons? Well, we've never said that you can't go out to train because you do have a valid ADI badge, but the problem is, it's the regulations have been set against the coronavirus regulations of 2020 are stipulating from the DVSA, who's advised by or told by the DFT that only training should take place to key workers who have a emergency test that's already booked. So the problem we have with anybody training outside that remit is, yes, it's legal for you to do it, but the problem is the regulations that come up are allowing the police to look at vehicles that are driving with more than one occupant. And if they have L plates, it tends to track them to see if the people in the vehicle are from the same household. And this is one of the problems that's arising, and ADIs have been stopped and unfortunately either giving cautions or fines. So it doesn't stop you training, but you'd have to have very good circumstances to put to the registrar as to why the police has stopped you and given you a caution, because under the terms of your ADI badge, within 7 days of being stopped, cautioned, prosecuted or fined, you have to inform the registrar of that reason. And the fit and proper persons part of the registration is really comes into question if you don't tell the registrar in those 7 days. Your circumstances might be good, you're training a key worker or whatever, but if you haven't told the registrar in those 7 days, that's the biggest problem that you come across.
Yeah, I mean, we can move on to the likelihood of fines. What is it exactly the police would issue a fine for? What happens if I appeal? All those kind of things towards the end of the webinar, because I've got some updated advice from DVSA on that as well. But everything that Howard says there is very valid. But I know that's a key question for people about the legalities of training. So I think we've got the majority of people on now, and we are on 1 minute past noon. So we'll get going on this. What I'll do first is I'll nip through the letter, the salient points, obviously not all of it, it's a 6-page letter. And then I'll try and elaborate on some of the points. We did do a video yesterday, myself and Chris Benstead, where we talked about the letter. In case you missed that, we'll just, kind of flesh out some of the points in here, and so you can understand a little bit better what's in the background from DVSA's thinking. Then we'll move on to a few questions, and I'll talk about some of the key questions that I'm already throwing back to DVSA today on why and when we can start training again. So you will have received a letter yesterday. ATB owners and vocational trainers will also have received a very similar letter. Our apologies that you were started to see that letter being leaked on social media before it came to you directly. I have had a conversation many times with DVSA about their examiners leaking information before it's actually set for official release. I know many do this in a very well-intended way. They want to help people, they want to inform people, but in terms of cascading communications in a consistent way, so everybody who should receive them receives them at the same time, that it's not professional communications to just go out before your DVSA itself has released the information. So that and that's what it causes, is that some people in some areas of the country who have a guy who likes to let them know stuff and thinks he's being very nice and keeping them informed, they get to know before a lot of other people get to know. And it doesn't necessarily always come with the communication that it should do. It's an anecdotal, I know this, I've got this information. It hasn't all the information surrounding it that you need. So whilst we're not trying to say put a muzzle on your examiners, I've asked DVSA to make that communication to their teams that they need to think carefully about what they communicate, especially as in this case, if they've been told the communication is embargoed, which means you're not supposed to discuss it or send it out before DVSA themselves have sent it every single ADI via the official mailing channel as well. And we've had a few other incidences of that throughout this crisis where, again, probably well-intended, but not necessarily thinking it through. Test centre managers and examiners have shared information with their local ADIs that actually isn't the confirmed way of doing things yet. It's not the right information necessary. It's only what they're hearing in their area, applying to them and their individual circumstances. For example, we've had things like examiners saying, well, I'm not expected to be back to work till mid-August, and none of us are. That's not strictly true. There are examiners that are already back. There are examiners that are going back shortly. So their individual circumstances is not the case of the whole. And to share that with ADIs as if that's the whole situation for the whole of the country is a little bit misleading as well. So we're trying to, advise DVSA that communications haven't been brilliant, and there's been a lack of them, but when they do come out, everybody should be hearing the same thing at the same time as well, so we don't get these disparities in communications. So going on to the letter. The letter really set out in the first instance why testing has not been resumed to this point, because we've got this wider public health advice and the screen to put on it, which is, are we meeting the key 5 tests in terms of COVID-19 resistance and management? which is to protect the NHS's ability to cope. A consistent fall in the daily death rate, which I know obviously a lot of people are arguing we are starting to get the consistent death rate fall now, so why aren't we being freed up to go out training? Reliable data showing the rate of infection is decreasing across the board. Now, yes, again, we can argue that there are decreases in infection, but sadly, we're also seeing some spikes in areas as well. So we're talking across the board is Public Health England's viewpoint on exposing certain areas back to work, which is an exposure if they're in close proximity with their clients. Confident that the range of operational challenges like testing capacity and PPP are in hand. So that's what we'll move on to in a moment. Are they in hand, and are DVSA able to get up to speed quickly enough if given the green light to go with testing? And be confident that any adjustments to the current measures will not risk a second peak of infections that overwhelm the NHS. I think that is one of the key points that Public Health England is concerned about with professions such as driver training, is that given the close interaction of the candidate and the pupil, will that mean an exposure and a frequency of candidates during the day, especially through test centres as well? Will that mean an exposure that we shouldn't really be having at this moment in time? And the reality is there has been no green light from government as of today to say they're confident that all those 5 tests have been met for this context of testing, and therefore DVSA can trigger their plans to put testing back into operation. So even though they've announced their plans and the roadmap, which is exactly what we asked for, is if you can't tell us when, you can tell us how and what's been the problem resuming testing, and that's what we've got to some extent in this letter. It's understanding why they still haven't got that green light, and they are waiting on decisions that are outside of their hands. They are hopeful that they will get that green light very, very shortly. Yes, I've mentioned that there are spikes again happening in infection rates in the areas like the southwest, but are they so troubling and worrying? And do we think they'll be sustained and repeated across the country? We just don't know that, but there is that fear of that second spike. So what they're really worried about is in terms of planning to restart their services, how quickly can they start these services off again? Now, DVSA have done a lot of wargaming, a lot of planning, and they're confident that if they can get those plans into action, they can get what they need to do up to speed quite quickly. However, there's key areas where, again, they have to rely on third parties, and that's what they're working through at the moment. So if we one of the areas where they're going to have to rely on third parties is in terms of the building stock themselves to start delivering tests. So there's about 400 test centre locations that are used for Cat B in the UK. Not all of those belong directly or are owned by DVSA, so not in their power necessarily. So a lot of these are leased from landlords, and the landlord themselves has to be able to access the building and carry out all the checks that they need to do as a responsible landlord and by law before they allow a tenant to reuse the building and reoccupy. So that process has to happen. DVSA then has to ensure that the building is fit for their purpose, so not just fit for public to come into generally as a tenant. They have to make sure that for their service the buildings are fit to come into. And one of the areas that they reference in the letter is water supply, and the fact that a building that's been mothballed for a long while has to have its water supply checked because things like Legionnaire's disease can develop. And is it safe operating environment for their staff? You might not be going in there and using their water supply, but certainly the operational staff they need to provide testing, they have to give them a safe working environment. Now, things like that, it sounds like a little thing, but it's actually a big bug, pun intended, in the whole planning process. They have to rely on contractors to come in, specialist contractors, to give them that sign off that that building is fit from the water supply point of view and any other health and safety issue as well. That process can't start until they're ready to actually open those test centres. So that's going to be a delaying thing in their plans to get back. They've also got to make sure they've got the right resourcing back in terms of examiners. Now, there is a workforce of examiners there at the moment who are servicing the emergency and critical worker tests. And actually, as of yesterday, they've got through the huge backlog that they'd had of these critical worker tests. So they're doing quite well with them, and they're whipping through them quicker than I think they originally thought they would, which bodes well for testing restarting. So this resource of examiners who have gone back and worked throughout the crisis, these are the guys who they will be using to start the testing up for normal testing again, and adding to that coterie of examiners as more people return to work. The exercise that DVSA are doing at the moment is asking all examiners who is fit to work and in what time scale, who is shielding people at home and cannot be exposed until infection rates have gone down. So they are the ones probably that wouldn't be coming back to work until mid-August, because they are more vulnerable or perceived to be more vulnerable, and who is fit and ready to come back to work now and doesn't have vulnerabilities around shielding someone at home, or they themselves have an underlying health issue. So they are, as they now look to open up testing, who is it that's fit to come in and in what time scale? So we build up that resource of examiners. So initially, when normal testing does start again, it may be that not every test centre is ready to open straight away, because you've got these issues of getting the test centre out of mothball, checking it's safe to be used, setting it up to be safe to be used under new social distancing guidelines, and also, can we get examiners to that particular location? Have we got enough people there, or do we need to send people to a test centre that's, more functional and operational? So these are the issues that they're struggling with there. The operating procedures for tests are in place at the moment are for critical worker tests only, and they will be. I've heard questions, well, why do they have to have a new SOP, a new standard operating procedure written and trained for examiners and accepted by the unions? Can't they just use the one they're using for critical worker tests at the moment? They will use elements of that emergency worker SOP in the new way of doing tests for the time being, but there will be some amendments to that, and examiners need time to be appraised of those. New examiners coming back to work who haven't been working during this crisis at the front line will need time to get up to speed with the SOP, because they've not been actually delivering it. They might have read it, but they haven't actually been delivering on it. So there's a training and a bedding in need that needs to take place as well. So that's the making sure driving test centres are ready to open, preparing the guidance for driving examiners themselves, making sure we have PPE in place. Obviously, everybody's saying, well, I can get hold of PPE. Why can't they get hold of PPE? Supply through government chains tends to be a little bit more fraught, and they are normally supposed to go through suppliers that have gone through a tendering process, and kind of get them from the same places. So that makes supply into the government sector fraught. They're all trying to use the same suppliers that somebody else is trying to use as well, for example, NHS. So they're having to sort out different suppliers, because in the normal run of things, they would just go to one of the suppliers approved normally by government for equipment, who's already tendered and gone through that process. What's happening now is they're having to bring new suppliers into the mix, as the traditional suppliers are under massive pressure to be supplying lots of different government agencies and frontline places. So, whilst you can get your 50 to 100 masks and have a choice of places, it's not as simple in government terms, and they're trying to get up to stocks that are workable, but also get to suppliers that they are freer to use outside of that normal government purchasing framework. Understanding which driving examiners will be available, that's the piece about who's fit to come back to work, and discovering that piece. Now the big bit of this communication is about planning driving test schedules, looking at how many tests can we perform a day. Now, the thought on that one is that on average, driving examiners will do about 7 tests a day, but with the safe operating procedures and everything that has to happen in between tests, it's more likely that they will be at 5 driving tests a day, to allow less exposure for the examiners to less candidates per day, and also allow for the examiner to have that break between tests and make sure he's doing the hand washing and hygiene measures that they have to do as well. So they're having to plan whatever we resume as normal testing on initially less tests per day. So how do we get more people back to work so we can have more volume of people on the ground, because we're actually going to be per day doing less volume per examiner, if that makes sense as well. So it's scheduling that. And again, maybe less test centres being open immediately as well, because they're just not fit to be open yet with all those measures they have to put in place to prepare those measures as well. So that is why they have gone to the measure of saying that they will now put all tests that were rescheduled from before lockdown into what they call a holding pattern. So they will essentially, all of those tests get stripped out of the booking engine, and the booking engine remains closed. No one will be able to get into there and rebook any new tests at all. All of those tests that are put into this holding pattern are going to be put into a new system, and the system is being built at the moment. So don't expect that link to suddenly start being sent out this week to those pupils. But this system is being built for ease of use and speed of use. What will happen is all of those held tests will go into this new system. So when the pupil or the trainer booker is sent a link, they simply have to click on that link and their test information will automatically appear. And you, if you're the trainer booker or the pupil, does not have to resubmit all of that information as if you were booking a new test. It'll simply appear, and then they will be given a choice of new dates to book that new test in at their convenience. That will allow you as the trainer or the pupil, which is why it's important that you and the pupil are talking about this link when it comes through and making sure it's the best time for both of you, that will allow you to book tests in a time that gives you some time to get that pupil back on the road again. So I suggest obviously a communication from you to your pupils right now to look out for this link if they were the one that booked their test, or appraise them of the fact that you will be receiving the link and that you'll have a conversation with them. And, you know, that you're going to discuss when is the best time to have that test. You don't necessarily want the pupil to just go in and book something that suits them, but doesn't necessarily give you the time to be able to get them back on the road again. Now, I don't know at this moment in time, I wish I did, when that link is going to be sent out. I know they're working really hard to get this system up and running, because it will be much more simple than opening up the booking system and you effectively having to rebook tests. And they're also feeling that that system might fall over if they open it up and use that one, because there'll be a rush of people trying to book in tests that haven't been rescheduled as well. So hopefully that booking system, the one where you get a link straight to your pupils that they can find all their information and rebook straight away, should happen very soon. And as soon as I have an update on when that's going to be sent out to your pupils, we will let you know. But it's still, I know, all of that doesn't answer the question of when can you go back out and start training again. Now, Howard, I'm going to kick this one over to you. What's your interpretation of the law at the moment in terms of, because I'm struggling with this one in terms of finding something at all. So we've got to give the pragmatic advice that there isn't necessarily something that bans you in a regulatory or legal sense. What's your viewpoint on that?
The situation is the Prime Minister and the Chief Medical Officer have both stood up and said that there are certain areas of industry that will go back later than others because of the close proximity issues, and they will not go back until the 5 tests are met. Now, some have gone back without the 5 tests met because there's not such an issue with the close proximity, but we do have an issue with it. Transport been able to go back because they've put stricter regulations into double manning vehicles, and they've been able to do something about the driver's hours, curtail them and CPC and put them on hold. But there's not so much leeway that we've got in our industry to be able to do that. The questions I'm getting on the side are saying, why have we got to wait for test centres to open up? We don't really have to wait for test centres to open up to be able to train. It's quite true. But the R number is bouncing too close to 1. And what the DVSA are saying is guidance to us really is on their tri-weekly assessments that they do. And these assessments are COVID-19 impact assessments, which looks at the infrastructure being placed on the DVSA. Okay, it still doesn't mean that we've got to have test centres open to do training, but the risk that they are putting out to us saying the number 1, that the R number is too close to 1. And as I understand it from the statistics that I've been reading, that number needs to be down below 0.85 for us to be able with our close proximity to be able to train on the road and have a much, much reduced risk of catching from a contagion who gets into our vehicle. Now, Carly's mentioned that situation of us doing training when we go back, we're saying don't do any more than 5 hours. But the problem is that's still 5 households getting into your vehicle, and you have to vet those people very carefully. So a lot of going back is we have got ADI and PDI badges that are valid, that allow us to work. But the problem is we've got the situation where the R number is not at where it needs to be. We have not met the 5 regulations, those tests that the government have put up, and they are saying that we should stay off the road. And that's why the information of training key workers only, or critical workers they're calling them now, is because those people need to get to work to keep the wheels of industry and the health system going, and for people to have food delivered to their doors, and these very critical jobs. It also allows those people to be upgraded. They're saying about they have to have a test. Really and truly, fleet work can take place if the person you've got who wants to do the driving is a key worker who is changing a job role where driving is more prevalent, or they are upgrading to a different vehicle in order to continue with their duties. So we can train in certain systems, but the general public training will still be on hold because the R number is in the wrong place. And I can tell you now that Weston-super-Mare in the West Country, I believe, has now been shut for 15 days. It is COVID rancid, where the reduction in the lockdown has allowed people free movement or freer movement, and they reckon that COVID has been transmitted from the beaches of North Somerset, and that's now gone and ranked up all the beds in Weston-super-Mare, and apparently we've got a spike where the number is just above 1 in Manchester. So we're getting regional spikes, and the government don't want these, because if when they pull away all the SEISS and all the other schemes that have been put in for unemployed and for everybody else, once they're pulled away, they're not going to be able to cope with regional spikes. They've got to make sure this has gone down, because otherwise you will be worse off now than you already are in many cases. So this is the reason why we've got a problem at the moment with trying to wrestle with, we don't need test centres to go back to work. No, we don't. But the government legislation with COVID, the coronavirus, the health legislation that runs alongside those regulations is saying that until the R number is at the appropriate place, we should refrain from making the close proximity contacts that we have in our vehicle. Yes, we're going to mitigate it by sanitizing the vehicle, etc. But in some instances, with the R number being so high, it's the exposure you have to the people that get into your vehicle, despite the vetting you do, that could cause the problem.
I mean, Vanda asked a good question. If the R number needs to be 8.5, how will this work if the R number varies depending on the region? There is already talk of a rolling lockdown, a regional lockdown that might be instituted if there are spikes in certain areas of the UK. Certainly that is how Spain has been managing its lockdown, that some areas of Spain have come out of lockdown and are progressing to phase 3 and phase 4, which is complete de-escalation of their emergency states and things returning to more or less normal. But some areas around Madrid are still in phase 2 and are moving towards phase 3. But if there's another spike, they will put them back into the phase 1 and 2 if they have to, depending on the spike. And the UK is thought to be looking at those models in mainland Europe and elsewhere of having regional lockdowns rather than frustrating the whole return to normal and the whole economy recovering across the UK. So it may be that we do see regional lockdowns in the future as we emerge out of the more harsh lockdown. And just a note on things like hairdressers and dentists as comparators to driver trainers. Taking dentists first, dentists obviously work in an extremely sterile environment as it is, and they've had massive training in infection control because they're dealing with infection with their patients all the time. And so they are also needed to go back, because the risk of them not going back and performing some of their duties, we will have health crises in other areas. Oral health might just appear to some people to be, well, it's just about dodgy dentures, isn't it, and a filling need. There's obviously people with severe oral health issues that need that treatment and have not had that treatment for a long while, other than via emergency dental services. So the reason that dentists are being encouraged to go back now is for those reasons. They already have the training and knowledge to keep their environment sterile and kind of keep their patients in good care. They are needing to do things to mitigate health issues in other ways to people. And they are actually experts in infection control, and they've had that training, and they can certify that as well. Hairdressers is a little bit of a different thing. I hear you. They're not doing an essential service. Nobody's life is going to be lost if they don't have that tint done, much as we might feel it at times during this crisis. And they do work in very close proximity. And with you guys, they have not just in their salons, they have not just their client. There are other clients coming in and out all day as well for other people. So it multiplies. Even if it's in a wider and arguably more ventilated space, their risk is quite great as well. What I would say about that is the 4th of July is a date that was is mooted in a report a few weeks ago now, and will depend very much on those R rates. There is no given, like there wasn't a given until yesterday when it happened that retail would open. If we'd have had a spike in infection again and R rates had gone up in a worrying way before yesterday, retail wouldn't have opened either. And that would have been a last minute decision. That could have come on Sunday, that they would have actually said, I'm sorry, you made all your preparations, H&M and everybody else, but you're not opening tomorrow after all, because the R rate has gone crazy. So we do have to be prepared as an industry and as a society for the fact that we're not necessarily just moving to a line in the sand, and once we get past that, it's all going to go back to normal. We have to prepare for the fact that we might have to go into rolling lockdowns or regional lockdowns from time to time as well. However, given everything that Howard said, which is very, very true, what I have written to DVSA today is how soon do we think that we will get to a point of changing the advice from recommending that driver training and rider training is only for those taking an emergency test? Because it's my view that whilst we do have these spikes occurring in certain areas of the country, but if we can see that downward trend that is happening overall in R rates and reinfections and deaths, can we soon change the advice to something like, you can go back to work, and I'm paraphrasing here, I wrote it much better in the letter I wrote them this morning, obviously. You can start training again if your pupil has an essential need to learn to drive for either an employment purpose or a training and education purpose, i.e. getting to school and college, and their colleges and schools are actually open and they're not e-learning. And that they cannot commute using anything else like public transport. So do we think that might be the next phase of advice? Now, that's not full on go out, have everybody. And also it's not regulation, so it doesn't stop anybody training if they really want to. But if DVSA is playing the cautious card here and wants to limit the flow of trainers back on the road, because that in itself could push up the infection rate, then, could we do it in that measured and staged way? Whereas as we have been doing ourselves, if you ring us and ask us about your training situation, we will recommend things like triaging your pupils and looking at your coterie of pupils and saying, who is it that is going to need training sooner rather than later? Who do I have that is going to have a test as soon as the test centers open up, hopefully, sooner rather than later? Who is it that needs that test sooner rather than later? Or who is it that I've got that doesn't need necessarily a test, but does need to start their training or their driver development because they've either got a license or they're training towards one, because they're not necessarily a key worker, but they are somebody who has now got to go back to work. They're working in manufacture, they're working in retail, they're working somewhere where they don't have a choice to work from home. So they need to be able to get to work. And if public transport is a risk to them, are these a category that we should be looking to allow some training to occur in outside of key workers only? So I have asked that question today. I haven't got an answer, unfortunately, up to the point of this webinar, but I will share that response with you, because I do think we need to start moving to a time where guidance changes and is a more realistic reflection of who we can train in the next few weeks, rather than simply saying it's got to be only a key worker with an emergency test booked. I think we do have to start moving our economy and moving, people back to school and back to training and back to work. So do we allow a level of training that prioritizes those type of people? If we're talking about managing risk, it's really important to recognize that what is an essential service that needs to restart right now and what isn't. And you can argue that shopping isn't. I know, I get that one. But in terms of driver training, looking at who needs to learn to drive at this moment in time and is going to be needing to be mobile because public transport has become a problem, I think we do need to start talking about allowing some training of those people if the R rate continues to be, nationally taking a downward trend rather than an upward trend. And we'll just have to deal with the regional outbreaks in a way. I would say that is something, along with track and trace, that everybody needs to have in their mind, that the risk of COVID obviously is still very much there in the community when you go back to training. And it's the risk that you need to manage through all the hygiene measures, the training protocols that we've recommended. It's also a risk in terms of your income, in that you have to now plan for the fact that if there is a regional lockdown in your area, the advice probably will be that all of those trades cannot open, all of those services cannot be formed if that lockdown occurs in your region. So you may go through another period, I hope not, but there may, it's good to plan for the worst and have a contingency in place, that if you have regional lockdowns, how does that impact what you do? And will you have to have some time off work again? If track and trace is going to be an issue, and we're talking to government about how track and trace is going to work for your sector. If you are identified by track and trace as someone who may have been exposed and therefore have to be off work for 14 days quarantining, what is going to be the way that you support yourself? So yes, we're going to ask government whether you'll be able to do things like access a form of sick pay, not necessarily the model of statutory sick pay, because that is paid via a PAYE scheme and you're not in one predominantly, but is there going to be access to some level of sick pay, whether that's sick pay or allowing you to continue to access things like universal credit? But equally, have in your mind, what are you going to have as a contingency if you are identified as having been exposed and have to take 2 weeks off work via the track and trace system? Will you have the money in the bank to see you through another 2 weeks possibly of this? Because this could go on for quite a while. So these are the kind of things, these are the issues that, as I said yesterday in the video, I don't want to be the bad news bunny who just keeps piling on, questions to ask yourself that aren't particularly optimistic ones. But this is the risk of COVID that continues. It's that it's not just going to be back to work and everything's fine. We could face a second peak, and are you planning for that? You could be somebody who has to be off work for 2 weeks because of track and trace. You could face a regional lockdown in your area. So make sure that you're making plan for those. We'll lobby for government support for those, but it's by no means a given. And we have to be, thinking of some contingency funds in the bank for those times. So let's just go to some questions about that. Stephen, just to recap, you were asking, what did Howard say? Howard was just explaining about how, even though our newspapers are reporting that R rates are going down nationally, there are still some peaks in some areas, and we're still not at the R rate that Public Health England would like us to be at for some of these services where people are in closer proximity to each other occur. So although things like dentists have gone back because there is a public health need for them to go back in the sense of treating dental patients, to mitigate the risk of them having further infections and problems with their oral health. Things like retail are not judged as risky because more distancing can occur in that environment. They just don't think that certain areas are back to the level that we can manage the R rate, and will allowing certain close proximity working environments actually increase the R rate again if we allow a load of other people back into that arena. So those are the considerations that they've done at the moment. So Is there any more questions? Just going on to riders for the time being. What they sent out yesterday does apply to riders as well. Some of the things that they're looking at in terms of preparation to open the test centres is that some of the testing grounds that they use have again been mothballed, and they've not got a problem with Legionnaires' disease and water supply. It's more about moss and the unevenness and the cracks and things that have appeared in testing grounds. So they want to make sure that those kind of things are working and safe as well. I do keep asking the question on behalf of riders, and I know MCIA raises that one as well, about why can't riders go back now, because they are able to socially distance in their training, and they have a need to get people back on two wheels in many instances in service industries and frontline. That would be quite useful as well. So there is some talk of riders being able to go back a little bit earlier from a DVSA point of view. As again, we'll reiterate, there's no regulation or legislation that actually stops you going back to work right now. It's at your own risk and discretion. But we are looking at whether rider trainers can be recommended to start a little bit earlier. Howard, did you want to cut in there?
Oh. Yeah, sorry, I've pressed the wrong button. Sorry. Some of the questions I'm getting here are things about do the DVSA understand the problems that they have with getting their test centres sorted out are not necessarily the same problems that we've got with getting on the road of training. And again, it's the same old question: why have we got to wait for test centres to be available for us to be able to go out on the road?
I do agree that I do think that is a valid question. I absolutely accept. I'm a fairly risk-averse person, but I'm also a pragmatist. I accept all the arguments about the R rate and fear of pushing the R rate up by allowing a flood of professionals and their customers back into an arena where they are at more risk than most people because of the close proximity working. But I do think that I'll be very interested in what the response is from DVSA to my question this morning about why and when can we think about changing their guidance from kind of the red phase, which is only those trainees and trainers who are training a key worker with an emergency test, moving to more of an amber phase, I suppose, of saying you can go out and train if it's somebody who has an essential need to drive, including and outside of key workers, because they have to start commuting again to either a school, a college, or a place of work, and we need to get them on that journey. And the other is, if we stipulate, like some professions have, that if people undertake training specifically in risk, the risk mitigation for COVID-19, things like infection control and safe training protocols, i.e. the course that the certified course that we're just about to launch this week, is that a way that we can make almost an agreement between the industry and the regulator to get them to amend that guidance and relax it a little bit as well? So that's the question I've asked. If we can do that, if we can, not today, now, but can they consider moving the guidance a little bit here and allowing some more training to go on? What's your view on that, Howard?
Yes, there's a lot of things that we're getting. I mean, what you're saying there, but other things. Instructors are saying that they're seeing a lot of the school of mum and dad out there at the moment as well, which, although we're talking about the R number, it's not going to quite affect them because they are in the same household. But again, the situation, I've been asked several times now by ADIs who said, look, but I'm getting parents come up to me now and saying, can they go out training? The answer actually is no, believe it or not. The police will still stop them on L plates, not because, and then you do them being in the same household. It's because although people are allowed to travel around and go and see family, it is still accepted as an unnecessary journey, putting an unnecessary burden on the emergency services if things go wrong. And that's still very much in the police's mind when they stop and question.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really tricky balance, and I see what people are saying, that there are, up to 17 driving schools working in one person's area. Yesterday, we've got fleet training bodies who are also royal, ordnance safety bodies who've sent out messages to their fleet trainers saying that they will they will start fleet training again on the 29th. As you said, the school of mum and dad is allowed to go out there. That's why I think it's really frustrating. So, that's why I've made that request this morning to look at relaxing guidance, not, as I said, today, but is that the next step? If you don't want to go to the step DVSA of saying, yeah, it's fine, everybody, go out tomorrow, follow all the precautions, but we'll be fine. If you don't want to go to that step, stop thinking you've got to go to that step, and that's why it's taking you a very long time to have the nerve to do that. Maybe there's an interim step that you could consider that we go to in the meantime, and maybe we have to put some stipulation on that. And I think it's a very sensible one that people should undertake some level of training, if they haven't done already, in infection control and management of COVID-19 and in the training environment as well. And that could be the deal that we strike, the compromise with that as well. So I think I'll wait and hear and see what their response is to that, and share that with members as well. And if I don't get a valid enough reason for that not happening, then clearly I'll continue to push that question, for as long as we don't get any relaxation on that. There's been questions as well as, do we think we're going to get good enough notice when that system opens up again to bookings for us to be able to train our pupils? Well, bear in mind, destiny will be put back into your hands to a degree, in that you and your pupil will be choosing the date of the test. So I think we can pretty much assume, and don't quote me on it, because you're free to quote me on it. If it comes out of my mouth, I've got to stand by it, but not in terms of don't quote me on it because I could be wrong. I think we can safely assume now that actual practical tests happening in June is not a reality, because they've got to get this system built. They've got to get those centres out of mothball. They've got to get those examiners back to work, and we're nearly at the end of June already. Into July, how long is that process going to take of getting examiners back, getting test centres open? I think we'll see things come on stream, test centre by test centre in a way. It's not going to be a case that all test centres open at the same time. There's going to be, they're going to try and get as much of a geographical spread of test centres open as they can across the UK. But it might be that in one region, you have less choice of test centres for a short while than you normally would do. So be prepared for being offered the chance to book a new date, but be prepared to travel, which is kind of what the DVSA has always said. When people say, oh, there's no test available for 12 weeks in my area, there has always been the option to go to another test centre. Yes, it might be a longer commute and a longer drive in unfamiliar territory for that candidate, but that's certainly going to be the case here, that you may have to go to a different test centre to get that test sooner rather than later. It may be that some people don't want their test sooner rather than later. They're glad of the opportunity to push back, and that's what we mean by triaging. If someone's not desperate for their driving test, is happy to continue training with you until they feel confident, those people should take that opportunity to push back a little bit more. I don't have any news on how soon would the ordinary booking system be open after that, because they've got hundreds of thousands of tests to reschedule here. So it's going to take some time before new driving tests book in. So those of you who are saying, well, what's to stop me taking on new pupils and start training from scratch? Absolutely nothing, theoretically. However, it's about understanding the expectation you create with that pupil of how soon they'll be able to have a driving test. I would make sure I communicate to pupils that if they do start with you now, there is not a massive rush to the test centre, which probably suits you, but you get those pupils who think it's 10 lessons and they're done. It's making sure that more than ever, it's not 10 lessons and you're done. That's not the norm anyway. But in this particular time, new tests being booked in is going to take some time and happen after all of these rescheduled tests have been booked in again, because that is the priority. Is everybody who was supposed to have a test before lockdown is the priority. Now, just going back on that booking system, it will happen in waves. So those who've had their test, have been waiting for their test the longest, they will be the first to get the link, and they will do their booking in, and then people will be communicated in waves after that. So not everybody with a rescheduled test is going to get that link and be able to change their test in the first week of operation. It will be done in tranches depending on how long people have actually been waiting to be rebooked in as well. So 2 points of communication for you to make to your pupils right now. If they book the test, they need to appraise you as soon as you've got the link, and they need to check it in with you that you are able and comfortable to be able to do that test that they want to do, and the reasons why not, if you don't want to do it on the date that they want to do it, because you've got to give them some training. Or if you're the one responsible for booking their test, communicating with them when you've got the link and conferring about what is the best time for you to book the test to allow for that training again. Throughout, we have been, and they have been agreeing, DVSA, that there should be at least a 2 to 3 week period of notice for the ADI that they can train within before that pupil goes to the test centre. That is an extremely important consideration that is trying to be factored into all these plans. They don't want their examiners exposed to the risk of pupils turning up for tests who aren't adequately prepared as well.
But they also don't want their examiners sitting on their hands waiting for 3 weeks for nothing. So once they've actually put that notice out, they will start priming the examiners to be ready with all of their background stuff they've got to do on cleanliness and how to meet and all the training they're doing. So pretty much when they put us on the road, they should be starting the training with all the examiners at the same time, so both meet at the same time.
Benji's asking, will they use our ADI numbers in the new booking system? We don't have lots of detail on the new booking system right now. We were only appraised of this whole process shortly before you got the letters yesterday. When they send the link, it'll actually take you to a pre-populated page within. That's the whole point of doing this, so it's a lot quicker. So it will take you to the original student's booking details and the original date, and it's from there that you change that. So if you're the trainer booker and you've made all that, it'll take you to a page where all the information that you originally submitted is in there, and from there give you the choice of dates to change. So as soon as we have more detail on that, we will let you know that. Paul's asking me, how would you police the midway step? You can't. I'm not making any undertaking that you could police it in any way. It's just about sending them. Look, people aren't following the recommendation that DVSA have already put out there. It's designed to mitigate the numbers, because psychologically and human being wise, they will be a coterie of people who ignore all recommendations and advice and don't give a stuff what DVSA say. They're going back out there again, and there's nothing you can do to stop me. There is a coterie of people who will respect the recommendation and hold off a bit longer. So it's not designed to stop everybody and tell everybody how to behave, but it will act as some kind of floodgate or measure to stop everybody going back at the same time. And I think, one of the things they could do if they decided to go down that route is communicate to regional police forces again that this is what they're recommending, and that the regional police forces, they do stop people. They do ask them, what is the nature of the training? Is this essential? Is this somebody who needs to learn to drive? It might mean that you just get a bit of hassle, but not necessarily an enforcement. But all of that has to be discussed, and we do have to have some out of the box thinking about how we move things, forward now. Because we can't just stagnate at this level of only emergency tests training going on at all. We've got to move this forward in some way.
Right, we've got a lot of questions now on the theory test certificates going through expiry times now. Now, the situation we've got now is the 1988 Road Traffic Act does not allow currently for the theory test certificates to be renewed or to be extended. Sorry, they're not allowed to be extended. For the DVSA to get that extension added to the amended 1988 Road Traffic Act would take a disproportionate amount of time in view of everyone trying to get things going. So what they've tried to do is try to get it amended into the coronavirus regulations, and they are still trying to do that, but they have not yet succeeded. Again, that takes a little bit of time, but not quite as long as getting the full statute changed. So people have put on the side here, what are we doing about theory certificates? Currently, if your student certificate is about to expire, even though they've had a rescheduled test that is after that expiry date, they currently will have to retake the theory test. and there's nothing we can do about that. The DVSA are very aware of this. We've had a few conversations with them. They are in the process of trying to change that, but it has still to go in front of the minister's trying to push this through. Actually, the minister himself is trying to push this through, but it's taking time, and we don't know at what date that will come to fruition. And so we don't know who is going to be affected and who isn't. So yes, it seems a little bit of unfairness on some people that may have to take their theory again, and later on others probably won't have to. But as the law stands at the moment, that is where we are with it.
Theory. Yeah, they want to. They haven't officially said that they are looking to get an extension to theory, CBT, and international licenses. But that is what is going on. What they don't want to do by not announcing that this is what they're working on is build an expectation. They don't want to build an expectation they'll be successful. There is a will from DVSA, and the minister is supporting that, to look at an extension for a short period to those certificates, CBT, theory, and right? How is it? The international driving licenses?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
That's a concern for some people as well. But obviously there's a lot of things going through Parliament at the moment. There's a lot of things that people are asking to be thrown into these emergency response regulations to allow extensions. So it's going to take some time to get that approval, and whether it's a massive priority. But it is something that has been asked for at the very least. Just the caveat is, don't expect there to be an immediate solution on that one. We've got a question then. Motorcycle tests were cancelled and not rescheduled. Does that mean pupils booked up in March are right at the back of the queue? No, they are going to treat motorcycle tests that are cancelled like the rescheduled tests. So as far as I understand it, and I'll get some clarity on that today, that they will also be sent a link at some point to rebook the motorcycle test when those are ready as well. They won't be treated unfairly in the respect that they were cancelled rather than rescheduled. It's about being as fair as possible to everybody who has been waiting the longest. That is what this system is being designed to manage, creating, to create fairness, so people who, have been waiting a very long time don't have to wait or go back to the back of the queue in any way. There's a good question here from Tina. If you are teaching against advice, i.e. a recommendation from DVSA that we don't allow training for non-essential workers at this time, will the insurance be valid? That is a purely individual insurer decision. Some insurers take the view that only if the ADI license is still valid, i.e. has not been suspended, which it hasn't at any point during this crisis, they are fine with teaching still occurring. Some are saying that they've got their own specific stipulations. Some are saying if the advice from DVSA is that you shouldn't be teaching, then we're not comfortable with offering insurance at this time. So you have to check, and it is your responsibility to check with your insurer on that issue. So I don't know which insurers for sure are saying what. So go and speak to your individual insurers. But it's your business, your responsibility, your insurance, your risk. So call your insurer if you're about to go back out there, and understand that whether you're covered or not, or what the restrictions on that cover may actually be. Has the DVSA cancelled all driving tests in July? Fundamentally, I suppose the answer is it yes. Or the rescheduled tests are not cancelled. They're very careful about their terminology. They are being put into a holding pattern, and I'm smiling because so essentially they're cancelled and they're being moved. They're put into a holding pattern, and then they will be rebooked using this link. That does not mean no driving test will happen in July. It will mean that the original date somebody has, they will be offered the opportunity to book another one, and that may be in July. It just means all current dates are kind of up in the air. Everybody's put in this holding pattern. They'll be sent the link with a priority to those who've been waiting the longest, receiving that link first. They will then be able to go in and book their tests. So it could be that some are happening in July, but it won't be the original date that people had.
Can I just watch here, please, Carly? The people are getting confused here. All of the tests that are out there at the moment have all been rescheduled tests. There have been no new tests given to anybody because no one's been allowed to book since the close down. So all of these tests are rescheduled, and the statement says all rescheduled tests are on hold. That includes at the moment those that are in August. And I know there are August dates that have been given as well. So every test that has been issued that you think your students are going to do are currently not taking place. They are all on hold. The DVSA are opening up a new portal system for booking, and they're doing it in tranches. The March tranche will go first, the April tranche next, the May next, and June after that. So the people will take their turns in their tranches to be able to rebook their tests. We suggest that when the DVSA contact these students, that the students contact you in the first instance. Otherwise, if you've got a multiple amount of tests, if your ADI number is not used, your car could be double booked, and then they won't get a chance to redo that test. They'll go to the back of the queue.
Yeah,
It's very important.
Yeah, it is really. I mean, I know most of you have been communicating with your pupils throughout this period, but it's more important than ever because they'll be possibly confused by this communication when they received it. I don't know whether the pupil communication went out yesterday after all, but it was scheduled to go out yesterday to pupils, or it's going out today. But they'll be confused and not knowing what to do, or they may do something and it's not the thing that you want them to do. So they might leap, when they get the link sent through, they might leap to do something and you don't want them to do that. So make sure you communicate with pupils now what the situation is and what you would like them to do and what is best for them to do when they get the link through, if they made the booking themselves, or what you will do when you get the link through and why you're making those decisions as well. So I think it's important that communication takes place with them this week.
Okay, Carl, we've also had a problem with sound. And there's a lot of people that have said that when I spoke about some legal stuff earlier on, that nobody could hear it. So can I please have a chance to say it again?
Yes, yeah, go ahead.
Right. It was about, what I was talking about was a situation where some people were saying, are we allowed to train? Now, first of all, before I go and do this, can I have something in the chats or whatever to say everyone can hear me? Because we are getting sound problems somewhere around the country. It seems to be a certain area that's having this problem. So I'm looking at chats now. Can people hear me, please? Can I say something in the chats?
Loud and clear.
I'm getting a few. Yeah, they're coming through. So those who couldn't hear me, I assume, can still hear me now. Brilliant. Okay, right, I'll continue then. So what I was saying then, so just to reiterate what I said before that people didn't hear, sorry, I've got your phone going off here, was the situation of training. Somebody asked the question, are we allowed to go out and train even if we don't have tests, if we don't have key workers? The government are saying that only key workers should be trained at the moment because the government do a tri-weekly assessment, an impact assessment for COVID-19, and that looks at the weighting that is on their infrastructure being test centres, examiners, and what the R number is doing. And the R number needs to be bouncing below a certain number, which from the statistics I've been looking at, looks like it's got to be about 0.85. Don't quote me on that because it might be wrong, but they have got to look at this number being down sufficiently low where the risk of contamination to other people through our close proximity has got to be mitigated to as low as possible. And that includes mitigation of us sanitizing the vehicles. So in terms of close proximity, we should not be training anybody other than the key workers who have a key worker test, because we could actually involve the induction of another spike, because effectively what's happening is when we get people into our vehicle or several people into our vehicles each day, we are inviting different households into the vehicle. Now, that is what the police can stop you for with our plates on. They can, at the moment, under the coronavirus things, we've discussed this, you probably heard Carly say something about it, there is a risk that the police will stop, and most police forces are quite vehement about this. We've had phone calls from the ADIs saying that if you go out on our plates and you can't prove that you've got a key worker and police stop you, first of all, you've got a person in your car who's not from your household. Secondly, the government regulations are stating that only key workers should be trained. So there is a chance that if you are stopped, you could get a caution, a warning, you could get a fine, or you can get prosecution. We don't believe the police are prosecuting, but they are fining. So if you get a fine, every ADI's driving license at Swansea is marked with a marker saying you are an ADI. If the police raise this license for checking or any other reason, then the marker gets DVLA, DVSA, DVSA to the registrar to say that something has happened to that license. Under our badges, the regulations of our green badges, we have got to inform the registrar within 7 days that we've been stopped by the police, cautioned, whatever. And if we don't, that could then go against us as a fit and proper person. And it's because we haven't registered it ourselves with the registrar that could actually produce the removal proceedings. If you've got the mitigating reasons as to why you were training and it's all above board, then of course the registrar would take that into consideration and waive everything. But really, that should only be currently for key workers who have got a driving test that is booked. Now, we've actually discussed this with the registrar about key workers going out for training that need updating of skills. And with our register, we've got our voluntary register of key workers. We've bent the rules a little bit, and it's been accepted by the DFT that if a driver trainer registers key workers who don't necessarily have to have a driving test, but take them out for developmental driving, then that appears to be okay.
The DVSA have also communicated to all regional forces that if somebody makes an appeal with that regional force to their appeals team against a fine, that force should look at that particular case if the ADI is able to provide evidence they were training a key worker. So police forces are aware that whilst they might fine you, that they should, if they receive an appeal from that trainer and that trainer has evidence of carrying out essential training with a key worker, then they should reconsider enforcing that fine. So most police forces may look at issuing fines, but whether they enforce the fine or if they decide to drop it on appeal because you provide evidence, that certainly is the advice that DVSA are giving to those regional police forces as well. And as guidance on training is changed, so ergo, say we got to a point where DVSA did change its guidance in the next few weeks to along the lines that I spoke about earlier, DVSA will communicate with regional police forces that the guidance has changed, and that if police do want to stop people or feel the need to do that, they should be asking them exactly about the nature of their training and respecting the fact that, you know, there is more latitude for trainers to train more types of people if the guidance is changing as well. So it's not just a case of DVSA will change the guidance and the police will still be fining people. I should imagine that they will, kind of change their attitude to things as well. Now, there have been some police forces act in different ways to others. Some are not interested in many ways in certainly down here in Surrey, we seem to have had quite light touch on quite a lot of things. You know, even when the lockdown was in full operation, we didn't seem to have as many things happening in the news about enforcement going on for picnics or people out too many times a day for a walk or anything like that. In other areas, you'll have seen quite a lot of what's been described as overzealous policing in some respects. So the attitude can vary from force to force about what they think is a priority for policing resources and what their attitude is. So be watchful of that. You might say, well, we've had nothing in our area. That's a different treatment by a different force. In some areas, fines are as much as £600 that ADIs have actually received. And police forces have confirmed that if they see someone with L plates on them and they have a reason to stop them, they will stop them and ask those questions. And if they feel they need to levy a fine, they'll levy a fine.
Yeah, that's all correct, Carly. That's actually right what you're saying. There's exactly what they're saying, and it's exactly actually goes directly with what we've been told on the support desk with the ADIs contacting us and saying that they've seen ADI. I think there was an association, I think was Derbyshire, a local association in Derbyshire. The guy got hold of me on Friday last week and said that one of their association members last Monday was stopped by the police for training people who weren't key workers, and he was fined. We also had one of our members of staff physically witness an AGI being stopped on the side of the road outside their flat, and the student, I believe, was not allowed to get back in the vehicle again. The police made the student walk away from the vehicle. The instructor had to walk away on their own, had to drive off on their own. How bad is that for goodwill? How bad is that for advertising? That student will tell 10, 100 people on their mobile phone what's gone on, and that is not going to do you any good. That negative publicity is not going to do you guys any good at all.
Yeah, so Trevor Price is asking us to clarify the wording for key workers. Do they need to have the test actually booked and confirmed, or is it sufficient for them to have applied for the test and be able to evidence that they've applied for the test? What's your view on that one, Howard? Because the letter...
Now, according to the paperwork I've seen and what I've seen in writing is that test must be given to the student. They must have a test booked.
Yeah, so if you've got evidence the pupil has a test booked and they have any correspondence from the DVSA either acknowledging their application or confirming the date, that would be reasonable evidence to submit to mitigate a fine as well. So if they don't necessarily, obviously you're training them because they would have had it at that point, but if you can provide any evidence, or your pupil can, that they have a test slot booked from DVSA, or DVSA have acknowledged their application, that is on the grounds of being reasonable, is treated as evidence that that key worker does have an emergency test booked.
That's correct. That's the situation. Yeah. Okay. Now, another question we got here, Carly, is for the motorcycle guys.
Yeah.
Who are saying that why is it that with all this going on with although they got their letter, but why is it that the CBT seems to be in a situation where it meets all of the risk assessments for segregation, the riders on their own bike, all of the social distancing, it meets all social distancing. Why is it that CBTs cannot take place?
At the moment, they are actually looking at the possibility that they can resume CBTs before they'll resume car testing, because they do acknowledge the ability to socially distance. What they're doing at the moment is checking, running through the plans for resuming CBT testing and seeing where the risks are, particularly against those key risks that we identified in the letter that they've highlighted. And they're talking about the fact that if we can be assured that trainers are going to follow the kind of guidelines that we're issuing, MCIA are issuing as well, then it may be an easier win to get CBT tests started up sooner rather than later. So as well as a weekly meeting on the car side of things with us and DVSA, we also have, unlike the other associations, because our diversity of members is rider and vocational licensing as well, we have two other meetings. We have one on the vocational side and we have one on the rider side. And the last meeting of the rider stakeholder group with DVSA was more hopeful on the fact that CBT would resume sooner rather than later. So please bear with us, and we'll see if there's any progress on that in this week's meeting, and whether we can give you any happier news on that one.
Okay. Now then, Gloucester Police response is regional. Some places in Gloucestershire, the police are stopping, and some aren't. I mean, it really is down to the constabularies on how they conduct their force. So it is sketchy. So this is what we're saying is I had some response from the support desk last week, where a guy in Luton and another ADI in Nuneaton both phoned their police forces, and they both said that under no certain terms they would be stopped by the police if they went out on the road. It looks like that Gloucestershire is probably slightly more lenient. But I would say to you that if it's a situation where you're not sure whether you're able to go out or not, then contact the police force in your area and see what they say, and get from them directly exactly what they think the mitigating risks, how you can mitigate things, and what they regard as a mitigation for you not to be fined, etc. The best thing to do is, if these are the people that we think might be holding us in abeyance, then talk to them directly and say, well, what do we do in order to get around that? That might be a good thing for you to do. Some of the instructors already have, but most of them have come back quite negative and saying, no, if you go out, the government guidelines are key workers only. If you go out with learners, then we're afraid we're going to bring you to book.
Anthony is asking, just to confirm, I can't teach a key worker unless they have an emergency test book. You can teach a key worker, but it is at your risk and your discretion. There isn't specific legislation or regulation that says you cannot do it. It's just the regional police force may have a reason to stop you, and they do have the powers and the discretion to fine you if they feel what you are doing at that time presents a risk to the wider population. So, yeah, technically, you can go and do what you want in terms of training right now. You have to make an individual decision about those risks of receiving a fine from the local police force, depending on their treatment of legislation and regulation that they're allowed to use at this moment in time. And whether that fine is, then there's the risk of whether the fine is enforceable. And if you appeal, will they accept your mitigating evidence that you were training an essential worker? And some forces may be lenient and say, okay, even though we fined you, we recognise that you were training somebody who didn't necessarily need a license, but they did need to be trained in that vehicle at that time for an essential purpose. And you also run the risk of, on top of that, if you do get a fine and it is enforced, that the registrar, makes a treatment of that's not fit and proper behaviour for an ADI. Now, Jackie Turlin has said that each case will be treated on its own merits, and even if the police do enforce a fine, they will look at your evidence again in relation to the activity you were carrying out and make a judgment of whether the police have perhaps been overzealous in that case, or it's an unfair treatment given you were maybe training somebody who didn't need an emergency test because they were going on to train, they were going to drive a van on a Cat B license, but it was safer for them to have some training rather than go out and just drive a vehicle they've never driven in before, in a context they've never driven in before. So I can't give you solid and firm answers for every scenario because, unfortunately, it's at the discretion, one, of the police force, and two, of the registrar about how they treat each case. But you just have to bear in mind the risks that you may run. And as Coward said, you could possibly contact your local police force and have a conversation with them about what their attitude is going to be to driver trainers to returning to work.
What you could also do is, if you have an association, is invite the police force to a webinar and ask them to do a webinar with you. That's what Powys did, and that's how they found out about the situation in Wales. But why not invite them to a webinar? Now, another question, I've got several things here. There's a lot of comments here which people are still not getting the grips off here. They're still asking, what date can we go back to work? Now, let me just reiterate this for you, please. There is no set date. There will not be a set date. And the reason there cannot be a set date is because the government has to satisfy five key stringent tests. Now, those tests are all noted in the letter that you've all got sent yesterday. Every ADI in the country who's got their correct email address with the DVSA will have received that letter. And there are 5 strict tests that the government need to have sorted in order to release the total lockdown. We have to make sure those 5 tests are met, and this is not time bound. So we do not have a date of when the first test will take place. We do not have a date of when we return to work to get 2 or 3 weeks notice. We have to watch what the chief medical officer is telling us with those 5 dates. So we cannot give you a date. We are the DIA. We can give you lots of things, but unfortunately we cannot give you a date, not a set date. We have to watch and listen for the information that's given to us through the tri-weekly impact assessments that the DVSA do. That's a good marker of what's happening in an environment of ours, which is such a lot of close proximity.
Ian asked a good question. It is a good question, Ian, because I have been through the Coronavirus Act and the emergency amendments, and I'm struggling to see a current element of that and how they are interpreting it. As Howard said, what they seemingly are doing is making the fine pivot on the people in your car that are not from your household, because earlier in lockdown, why they were fining people was for non-essential journeys, and then obviously non-essential journeys were allowed again, and we can drive more or less where we want now. That isn't something that the police are going to be able to use as a method for fining or a reason to fine. Now it appears they are using the broad sanction of people in your car that aren't from your own household, and they're using their discretionary powers. In terms of what is the offence you are causing technically under the law, that is the bit that I was trying to get from DVSA as a confirmation, because things like having a picnic with more than 2 people a few weeks ago they were being fined on things like public disorder and pieces of existing legislation and regulation like that. I'm trying to get to the bottom of what is the specific breach of legislation or regulation that the fine hinges on at the moment. So we've got the clarity. I'm not trying to be some kind of Chartist rebel trying to overthrow the system. I'm not confident giving advice if I don't understand the rationale myself fully, or I haven't got an act or a piece of regulation that I think is fitting as well. So you get a very grey, it's all under that emergency coronavirus act and bill and all of those things through it. But when you actually go through it in detail, I'm looking for, and haven't found yet, the thing that they're pegging on it. It's the fact that the police have actually got a lot of discretionary increased powers at this time, not to do what they want, but that is where they are able to fine. But as I said, I'm trying to get the specific so we're all really aware and we can all believe in it a little bit more than we perhaps do in this moment in time. We get that they can fine, we get that it can stick, but I think we all want but what exactly is it that you're enforcing on? At this moment in time, it's not just the people in the household. There isn't a law for that. There isn't a social distancing rule in legislation. It's a guideline. What is the actual piece of legislation or regulation that they're allowed to enforce this fine on? So as soon as I get a proper answer on that, because it seems to be a hard question for people to give me a specific answer on, strangely, I will share that with people, because we want to produce some advice on this police issue specifically, and it's hard getting a consistent answer because different forces behave in different ways and have different treatments, and B, nobody else is able to point to a specific regulation or legislative piece that we can hang this on. Okay, so I'm just looking back through some of the questions. I know people are saying as well, what about builders in vans, 2 people, delivery drivers, all those kind of things. You also have the complicating factor that Grant Shapps in one of his press conferences did reference the fact that employees could car share because of the issues with public transport. And that also was included in an FAQ that DFT put out to the media, attached with a press release about relaxed lockdown measures. I think that's subsequently been revised, but that has caused some confusion. That Department of Transport themselves was saying that, if you can't use public transport, you're going to have to maybe look at car sharing. And the questions inevitably going to rise from that is, why can't instructors have people in their car if employees can car share with people from different households as well? So, there's not a perfect stream of communication going on here by a long chalk, and it's still very confusing because there's different pieces of advice contradicting previous pieces of advice that emerge all the time. Howard, you're being asked, you mentioned Paris Police. Please, could you tell people what was discussed, what the police actually said to that particular group of instructors?
I'm not aware. I got a précis from the Paris Association. One of the ADIs was in discussion with me over something else, and he said that we invited, it wasn't the chief of police, it was one of the divisional officers that they invited, as they wanted to know what the situation was with the challenging times over there, because they're on slightly different regulations there in Wales than what we are anyway. They're a bit more strict over there at the moment. And it came out of it that when the question was asked, why can't we go out and train? And he just turned up and said, well, the thing is, because the regulations are set on gov.uk that it should only be key workers, that's what we have to uphold. We are the law, and that is it. And that really was a stark answer the guy got.
So just to reiterate, what are the risks for people on going out training at the moment? It's insurance. Contact your training insurance provider and ask them what their viewpoint is on you training at the moment if you are considering running the risk. It's the treatment of the police in your area and what is their viewpoint on this. I'm trying to get guidance at the same time as I am from DVSA. I'm trying to get it from the National Police Chiefs Council. Now, many police forces have told me they do recognise our voluntary key worker trainer scheme, and that certificate could be used as mitigating evidences. But again, it's not widespread that every single force will accept that, and not an emergency test confirmation. You run the risk of the registrar viewing you as a not fit and proper person. And there's obviously the reputational risk, because some of the members of the public, even though they're allowed to go to B&M again and have been going to, Asda and Tesco all throughout this crisis, it's a bit of a glass houses scenario that they see somebody out delivering driver training and they decide it's not all right for you to be out and plying a trade. So you might get some reputational risk in your area if you're out and about at this time, not just, I hasten to add, from members of the public, but from other ADIs having a problem with that as well. So we've had some unfortunate incidents that, whatever you feel on this subject, whatever is your viewpoint, that some ADIs have received abuse for being out on the road from fellow ADIs, and I would make a plea that we don't descend into that level behaviour. There are polite ways of making your opinion known to somebody. Calling them a scab and being quite abusive on social media is not a look that we want for the profession as a whole. We've got bigger fish to fry in terms of problems for an industry at this time than people starting to attack each other. Is there
I've got a question, Paulie, from Pauline. Good question here. how do we as ADIs register on the booking system to avoid double booking? If you want to become a trainer booker, as they call them, Pauline, you have to contact the DVSA, which I'm afraid you can't do at the moment. In better times, you'll be able to contact them and ask for a trainer ID number. And that will be what they call your business number that you can book your students' tests on, so you can manage those tests into your diary. And that way, your car cannot ever be double booked. But you have to have the ID number because you need to quote it. This does mean that you have to pay for the tests at the time and then recoup the money from your students at the time as well. So any cancellations take place means all of the confirmations and all the communication comes to you and not the student, because you have booked the test. So the contract of that test is between you and the DVSA because you're the person that's paid for it. That would be the situation you're in there. As opposed to a student booking it, the contract is between them and the DVSA and not you. So you need a trainer booker number, which you get as known as a business ID, and you have to apply to the DVSA for that. But I understand at the moment that that area of the DVSA may not yet be open.
I'm just going to nip to other forms of testing, as in ADI standards checks and Part 3s and Part 2s, because we have had a couple of questions about those. ADI and PDI certificates are now starting to be issued. The registrar's team has been mainly home working throughout this whole crisis, and they've now managed to get a skeleton crew back into the office where they can physically start delivering the service of getting certificates out. So some of you might have started to start getting their certificates through, but it will still be a slow process for that. The feeling, we've been consulted, and some audit trainers who may be on the call as well have been consulted about what will happen with standards checks and Part 3s going forward. They're looking at the moment about how they can safely deliver Part 3s and standards check and going through that process. But clearly those will start after the backlog of Cat B testing is ploughed through, because with a challenged examiner resource, the priority has to be clearing this backlog first. And it may be that those who've predominantly worked on ADI enforcement roles as an examiner are going to have to work across the Cat B licensing tests instead for a short while. However, DVSA are very keen to point out that, for those who think they've evaded capture for their standards check for a while, and think they might not get a date at all this year now because of what's going on, they will be pursuing standards checks this year. They will be rolling out standards checks again this year, probably nearer towards the autumn, whilst we use the summer to get through the Cat B backlog and the motorbike tests. But they will be catching up with people from the autumn onwards, and the priority will be those people who DVSA rightly has their eyes on, the people that have failed to appear on several occasions for their assessment, or are a concern because of their performance on previous assessments as well. So it's getting to those people that cause a slight risk in the enforcement sense, and they shouldn't be kind of thinking, pressure's off, I'm not going to have my ADI standards check this year. There will be Part 3s resuming, and there will be standards checks. It'll just be a little bit later and behind these other checks as well. So keep on top of your training and development in this sense, and we'll update you as soon as we have more news on when, particularly Part 3s, for those who are keen to get on with qualifying for the industry, when those are going to restart as well.
Okay, Carly, I need to add something to that, if I may, please, because we're getting questions about PDIs. One of them is about the voluntary key worker register. PDIs, we're not accepting on that because PDIs have to have a certain percentage of, PDIs have the option, depending which way they've done their training, of having some of their sessions have to be supervised, and there can be no supervisor in the car. So that is a situation why PDIs cannot go on the voluntary register. And the question is, can PDIs continue training? They can, if they're on the supervisor, not on the supervisor, on the additional training situation, they can. But those on supervision, you're going to have to watch to make sure that your supervision is being done somehow. But the supervisor cannot be in the vehicle with you. They're not allowed to be. So you're going to have to discuss that with your trainer on how they're going to get around that, and possibly have to talk to the DVSA and see what the DVSA are accepting on that, because they may be able to put an intervention in place which says, okay, it should be a certain percentage of supervision done, but we can accept it by being done in a different way. So for ADI trainers of PDIs, you might need to take note that the supervision has not been lifted, and therefore you're going to have to come across another way of how these people, if their standards checks or their Part 3s are taking place, which I understand some of them still are at the moment, then you're going to have to make sure that they go up with the paperwork with all of it signed up properly, with all of the supervision done.
If you have an audit registered trainer, I would speak to them. They were on a call earlier this week, as we were as well, having an update. I'm just scanning the email on that one. Who will have had an update on what the plans are. They can't speak about them in detail publicly because it's still a consultation. And obviously DVSA, it's not a secret squirrel thing, but it's DVSA don't want to put stuff out there or have put stuff out there that's not necessarily what's going to happen. It's still a decision-making, brainstorming element, but they did want to speak to audit trainers about how that process could restart. So if you are with an audit registered trainer, for example, like the National Driving Schools or those who would have been on that call, do speak to them. They won't be able to give you intimate detail because they've been obviously told to keep it confidential what those consultative discussions are, but they'll be able to give you better guidance. If you're not part of that audit process, then whether you think it's a perfect thing or not and you've disengaged from it, there's the kickback. If you're not involved in those conversations, you're not involved in those conversations, and that's a decision that you make whether you involve yourself in that group or not. But they've certainly consulted that group with their plans, as they have with NASP as well. Getting a couple of questions about the financial assistance elements of things. I am aware of Excluded UK, and there is another group that is campaigning for the government to give some attention to those people who fell through the gaps of the self-employment income scheme, and also any other type of support like universal credit that they can't apply for. I do understand that the Treasury has been, and the Chancellor are looking at whether there are any other measures they can introduce to help. I think it's about 20 or even as high as 30% of self-employed people that don't fall into the current measures. Certainly, we've asked for the Chancellor to have a look at what else could be done for that percentage of people. And obviously, my other concern, as I said at the start of the call as well, is with track and trace and potential regional lockdowns or second phase waves of the COVID-19 virus coming in, and us seeing other lockdowns in the future nationally even. What are we going to do to assist those professions who are extremely income vulnerable because they don't have a protected salary and sick pay and all of those kind of things as well? So it is something that we are pushing for. Other than the self-employment income support scheme, there are other sources of funding that you could look to tap into. We've discussed those in other webinars and other videos that we've done, but those include the business interruptions scheme, loan scheme, the BILL scheme as it's known. That is really for larger organisations who are seeking larger amounts of support. So it doesn't really apply or help a lot of typical driving schools. There is the bounce back loans, which we discussed again on our Back to Business webinar, and we've also got a Financial Matters webinar in the Academy that's free to view. So go and have a listen to that. Bounce back loans, if you didn't know about those already, are a government-backed lending scheme that is offering anybody whose business has been affected by COVID-19 a loan of up to £50,000. So you can apply for loans from £2,000 to £50,000. The lending is you don't have to pay anything back in the first 12 months. You have no repayments. Your repayments will start in what we call year one. So year zero is the year that you don't make any payments. Year one, you start making payments, monthly payments, and they are capped at 2.5%. So it's very cheap debt, and probably cheaper than a lot of personal and business lending will be, other than from enterprise units, and people can offer small business support in the next few years. The term of the loan can be up to 6 years. So you can take the loan over 6 years. it can be used for anything, basically. There's not massive stipulations what it used for. Some people are going to use it to pay themselves income. Some are using it to consolidate debt. Having spoken to ADIs already, for example, they're getting a new car and it's much cheaper than, you know, a lot of the normal options that they would have looked at. Some people are using it to consolidate loans and credit cards they've already got and give themselves a break, because obviously they don't no repayment on that for the first 12 months until they can get their income up to the right levels again. Those loans are being distributed by, there's no early redemption fees for paying that money back. So if you do get to a point where you can pay the loan back in total, unlike a lot of lending, you can pay it back with no fee. The loans are being distributed via the high street banks. So most high street banks have got provision for these loans, but some are taking quite a long time because there's been a massive demand for these loans to actually process. Some people are applying and getting lucky and they get the right bank and the money comes through to them very quickly. Some have struggled with the volume of customers that they've attracted applying for the loan through them. I think some of the new online banks like Starling have had this problem, and it might take a little bit longer. So I think that you need to have a look at those options as well. There is also the option of grants that are managed and distributed on a regional basis by local authorities and enterprise hubs. So it's worth looking at a website that somebody mentioned to me yesterday and somebody's helpfully put on the chat. Turn to us, turn TURN to the number us. .org.uk. They are a debt advisory charity and benefits advisory charity, a little bit like Money Advice Services and Advice. They have a calculator which helps you find grants and business support, financial support in your area. Because as I said, we're not aware of exactly what every local authority is doing, but in some areas of the UK, the local authority is distributing small business grants as well. So, have a good look around and see who is offering financial support in your area, as well as that national level as well. So it's worth looking into all opportunities right at this moment. Even if you don't feel that you are that desperate right now, we've got a very broad church of trainers here. Some have had withstood the crisis financially just about. They had contingency funds of at least 3 months in their bank accounts. They've kind of planned for risk in their business life for quite a while. Some had no contingency funds at all and are really in dire straits now. But even if you're not at the absolute dire straits, everybody needs to think about this the next year at least being really quite uneven and challenging in terms of income. And sometimes getting cheap lending or getting a grant is really helpful in terms of stabilizing your finances and getting you on an even footing. I know it sounds a bit contradictory to say, get a loan to stabilize your finances, but that's what a lot of people do in small businesses, lower the cost of the debt that you have by getting the cheaper lending in to pay off the more expensive lending, especially if that lending is going to be subject to very variable or high the interest rate environment for the next 3 years as our economy goes through a deep recession. Okay, so I think we've answered a lot of the main questions people ask. Sorry if we haven't got through to every single person's questions on this call. I'm just going to have a quick scan through to make the government-backed lending scheme. You talked about the bounce-back loans. You've got till November to apply for those. Obviously, in August, there also will be a second round of the self-employment income support scheme as well. Caroline, just picking up on your point there, you're an audit trainer, haven't had any communication. I think what they did was that for that particular call, that meeting, they took a random selection of audit trainers, but as soon as they have taken the feedback from that group, they invited, I think, a selection of trainers, big and small, sole kind of a trader type person and larger national driving school. They're going to communicate something to audit trainers across the board, so you are appraised as well. So, but there's there's not that much detail that we haven't really alluded to in this call about conversations about how much of the training can be done on the road, how little exposure can we achieve for the examiner and the candidate and this all that kind of thing in that environment. So these are the considerations they're going through at the moment. What can be done to safely bring about standards checks and part threes? There is going to be, as I understand it, a priority to the part 3 tests starting before the standards checks if they can, because they're aware people want to get on with their qualification, quite frankly, as well. So I'd like to thank everybody for coming on today. We've got another Ask Us Anything session on Friday. We've been quite topic-led with our webinars throughout the crisis, but we decided to do a couple this week, which is more just like throw questions at us before the webinar and during the webinar as well. So anything we haven't answered for you now, either send on to the support desk after this call, or check out our COVID-19 advice online, because we might have answered quite a few of the questions on there, or wait for the Friday webinar, email us in between, and we'll discuss some of those questions on that webinar too. It may be that I've got a further update on Friday on how this whole holding pattern and booking system is going to work. But if I do get anything immediate, we will email that out ahead of the webinar. We won't wait until we've got the time to actually speak to you. But you know, I do apologise. The information is still quite sketchy and still quite patchy. As soon as we get clarity on this and questions that we're asking as well, we'll do our damnedest to get that information out to you straight away. But keep asking your questions. There's no stupid question, and sometimes it's a question that we haven't even thought of yet. And you know, we hope to keep you updated. We will be launching later on this week the full suite of COVID-19 toolkit tools in our members area for DIA members. That will include a certified course in COVID-19 infection control and safe training protocols. We've designed that so it gives you a wider understanding of the safe training protocols that are needed, not just with COVID-19, but any infectious outbreak and in general infection management in your work. That will generate a certificate and it's got a theory test that happens with it as well. That will generate a certificate that at least you can show to parents and pupils and fleet clients to give them peace of mind you've been through training. That will take the form of an online course. That will be free for our members. And in that toolkit, you'll also find some other tools like, you know, preparatory information for your pupils. So something you can hand out to your pupils about what they should be doing to prepare for returning to lessons. Our risk management matrix, where we identify key areas of risk and how to manage them. And there's also space on that for you to do your own risk assessment and create your own matrix as well. It'll have some business tools in there as well, like altering your terms and conditions, things like that. So look out for the launch of that this week. Our problem is we're about to launch and then we find something else that we know we should put in there. So we're waiting until we've got a full toolkit there. But I think that'll be a really useful thing when that comes out as well. But when you do see it, if it hasn't got what you expected in it, or there's a missing link, then please let us know and we'll get that together. So in the meantime, thank you very much for attending this webinar today. And let us know of any other topics you'd like us to cover. And hopefully we've had a bit of news, in the last 24 hours, and that's, I suppose, a step forward from DVSA. I'm hoping that we, in the next few days and weeks, get more clarification and guidance, and we start being able to look at, getting back to some level of normal sooner rather than later. But I'll speak to you soon. Stay safe, and thanks for attending today. Take care, everyone.